Good afternoon and welcome to our live Q&A with Bill Barker as Thomas Jefferson. Today we'll be talking about shopping. Let us know where you're joining from and any questions you have, you may leave in the comments.
Well, a good afternoon to all of you and welcome again to an opportunity to engage open and free inquiry, questions with you all. And particularly at this time of year, this Christmas tide, well, questions upon shopping. I have just been delighted to purchase for myself another pair of stockings and have entered it appropriately into my memorandum book. But that may be of no matter to you. So therefore, if you would allow, I'm more than happy to now receive your questions and curiosities, and Ms. Boyle will proceed to, help moderate our gathering here today. So the floor is yours. If you will kindly allow me to take a chair. Thank you. And to feel the more comforted indoors at this time of year, well, it is the season in which, having taken the temperature, we're now falling down to the freezing temperature, 32 degrees on the Fahrenheit scale. So I hope you feel warm and comforted to be indoors here at El Monticello and in our parlor. So, Ms. Boyer, what may be the first curiosity provided by our guests?
So is shopping a term with which you're familiar since you were born and grew up on a farm in the wilderness of Virginia?
Yes. You would think that having been born in this wilderness, and I still refer to myself as a savage of the forest, that a term shopping would be something more aligned with the urban markets, the centers of the counting houses, the centers of, great variety of shops. But yes, shopping, to go shopping, has been a term with which I've long been acquainted. In fact, when I was a young boy and had the opportunity to accompany my father to Williamsburg, a distance of 120 miles to the east from this wilderness here in the west of Virginia, well, then his father would attend to placing his patents in the old secretary's office, that is the public records office. We would then, the two of us, go shopping in Williamsburg, Virginia, and procure, niceties, if you will, that we might bring back with us and share with the rest of our family. So yes, to go shopping has been a term with which I have always been familiar, and certainly not the least therein engaged.
So can you tell us about some of your other earlier experiences going shopping?
Well, when I was a young boy and was able to attend the Old Royal College of William and Mary, indeed, I went shopping oftentimes at the bookstall. There was a stall across the street. I believe it was across the old Richmond Road from the Old Royal College that sold books that had been imported here, of course, many of them having been brought right to the dock there on Queens Creek. And I would go over and purchase many a book at my young age. My first books on architecture were procured from that bookstall. Mr. Robert Morris's select book on architecture, James Gibbs' book on architecture. So yes, as a young man, I would often go shopping in Williamsburg, attending to the Old Royal College. And I just saw something here that reminded me of some of the purchases in Williamsburg. Sealing wax that I would use, of course, in writing. And here, if you have a cauldron in which you could, a miniature cauldron, mind you, in which you would melt the wax. And then, of course, as I would write letters frequently in my youth, let alone as I've grown older, I would seal the wax there with this cipher, this seal that I still carry with me, my initials TJ upon there. And then, of course, to consider as well going shopping at a young age, I would often have to purchase, can you see it? A penknife. A penknife, often most necessary, not only for your quills and writing, but also when you would purchase a pencil, as I have right here, to be able to whittle the points properly with your penknife.
So you kind of mentioned this when you came in, but do you have a method of keeping a list of items that you shop for and keeping account of your purchases?
In fact, I will tell you, I have right here what I was entering into as I came to greet you all earlier, my memorandum book. Now, I have kept a memorandum book from the time, mercy, I was about, younger than 24 years of age. Those are some of my first entries. I did have several memorandum books before that time, brought up to do so. That is a memorandum book into which you would enter all of your acquisitions, your disbursements, that is, of monies, let alone all of your revenues, those monies that you might be making for whatever cause. But lamentably, most of those early memorandum books were burned in the fire at Shadwell House. Shadwell, of course, where I was born and grew up. It burned in February of 1770, and lamentably, along with many of my father's books in his own library, I lost my early memorandum books and most of my correspondence. But my memorandum book is where I continue to keep my accounts. Now, I will tell you that when I am on the road, that is riding or driving my phaeton from one place to the other, if I need to enter something immediately, I have my memorandum book with me. So I have several little ivory slabs, an ivory book. It is only about this long. And there, with a pencil, I enter all my immediate purchases or my immediate revenues as I need to. But it all goes in the memorandum book ledger to keep those accounts consistently.
So can you tell us a little bit about some of the significant purchases you bought in your younger years, which are still amongst your treasured possessions?
Yes, most happy to share with you this. This, I would say, remains one of my prized possessions. This is the slope, as you might refer to it. This is the slant, as you might refer to it, or you might simply refer to it as a laptop. I've heard that bandied about, and it is. This is what was made for me from my design by cabinet maker Benjamin Randall in Philadelphia when I first lodged in that city in 1775. And yes, if you have seen this before, here complete with its drawers of ink and pen and papers, this is the same upon which I drafted our Declaration of American Independence. Now, when I think of other purchases of which I still remain quite devoted, well, I'm looking out the window here from our parlor directly across to Mount Alto. When you come to visit at our Monticello, you will notice to the west is a taller mountain, a higher mountain. As Monticello in Italian, mont meaning mountain, cello small, well, Mount Alto, the taller mountain, is 400 feet higher than Monticello. Many people do not realize that was not amongst my inheritance from my father. I inherited 5 farms from my father. Mount Alto, when I was growing up, had been a royal grant by King George II to the Carter family, in particular inherited by Edward Carter. When I returned from Philadelphia, after drafting our declaration, after our Declaration of American Independence, within a year, I succeeded to purchase Mount Alto. 400 feet higher than Monticello, it became part of my holdings. I believe it was upwards of about 480 acres altogether. Now, here's something very, very interesting, is I am still proud to hold on to Mount Alto. As it had been a royal grant, it had to follow through the British laws of primogeniture and entail. So Mr. Carter, Edward Carter, could not sell that outside of the entail to which he was beholden in British law. However, when I of course, became the governor of our new Commonwealth of Virginia, submitting 126 revisals of the monarchical code under which we were born and grew up, Well, one of them, Bill number 21, dissolved primogeniture and entail. And so I'm most proud to think that after all of these years, that possession from my younger years still remains one of my great prizes. Coincidentally, I had intended in the original purchase to build an observatory on the top of Mount Alto with a very fine telescope through which I might gaze into the heavens, perhaps even discover myself the seventh planet, recently discovered by Mr. Herschel, Uranus, they call it. But I think I'll have to leave that project of an observatory unto our University of Virginia.
We've been getting a couple of questions from the audience. Chester wonders what kind of packaging your purchases came in.
Oh, Chester, I lament to say newspaper. Yes, newspaper for the packages, if you might refer to it, or very light, rather, I want to call it, well, tissue, of course, for very delicate items, for those elements of clothing, particularly ladies' clothing, the delicates, if you will, wrapped in tissue. But then altogether, to provide that tissue a greater support and protection, newspapers were usually bound up in twine. So that would be the package, Chester, that you were delighted both to give and receive in gifts.
And one more question from Deborah. She asks if you prefer to spend on material things like music and books or experiences like dining, theater, or travel.
Well, now, Deborah, I tell you that is a very worthy question, because aren't they both, not they both in kind, gifts, one material and the other of the mind and emotion. Well, cannot material gifts be conducive to emotion and to evoke the mind? What about a book, Deborah? A book is most delightfully experience as you read, to engage pictures in your own mind of what you're reading, books that would lift the emotion to great happiness or send the emotion into depths of despair. So I would not cite one more than the other. Many people have referred to me as somewhat of a materialist. Well, yes, may all of what you see about you, Deborah, the architecture of this room and its building, all of the appointments and the furnishings, of course, help to inspire, help to lift the mind, and as well provoke the emotions.
So turning to France, when you were in France for 5 years, it is said that you frequently went on shopping sprees. Tell us some of the most interesting things you purchased.
Well, I dare say you're looking at it right now as we are enjoying our conversation, looking all about our parlor here. You're seeing so much, predominantly what you're looking at, that I procured during my 5 delightful years in La Belle, France. As you saw just a moment ago, there were many of you looking up at the portraits of America's Vespucci and Columbus. Well, those were recommended to me by my good friend, Senor Filippo Mazzei. While I was in Paris, he suggested that I might procure those at a reasonable price. Many others suggested artists at the time who had become known for making copies of renowned paintings in particular. If you gaze above my shoulder, above my right shoulder, it would be to your left, you will see a rather provocative painting. Salome holding the head of John the Baptist upon a platter, the Herodiad, as it is referred, provocative indeed. But does it not inspire us? I go back to your question, Deborah, about something material that provokes the emotion. Does that not inspire perhaps a conversation within your head and your heart? And I dare say that is a copy. We believe it might be Guido Reni who painted the original, but there continues an uncertainty about it. I cannot be certain except to say to you all, yes, that's a copy.
So continuing on the theme of France, Greg wonders if you lost any of your French purchases in a fire at the dock in Norfolk.
At the fire in the dock at Norfolk, not that I recall. That's raising a good question about such a thing. I can tell you, Greg is your name? Greg, I can tell you this. I more or less, during those 5 years I spent in France, went on a shopping spree. Now, what does that mean? It means that when I was recalled to our nation to return in order, as I later discovered, to take up the commission as our first Secretary of Foreign Affairs, that is how the State Department was referred to at the time, well, then I went about how I might crate all of what I had purchased during those 5 years in France. I had my own ideas upon the subject, but so did Mrs. Adams. And it was Abigail Adams who helped me to understand how I could best crate all that I wished to bring back home with me. Here we are, Greg. 86 crates. Initially, the bulk was about 76 crates. I would say about 15 of those crates were upon the subject I mentioned earlier in my most prized possessions from my youth, books. 15 crates devoted entirely to sending all of my books back home that I had procured in France. The bulk, I said 76, then altogether there were a good 10 crates more. Now, what was enclosed within them? Paintings, sculpture. Oh, in particular, a beautiful, beautiful column, broken column that I admired in the garden of Madame de Tessé. She gifted it to me. I did not ask. Then, of course, scientific equipment, the locks from my doors there in my accommodations at the Hotel Langeais. Look at all of the furniture you see, the fauteuil here, and the chairs that I purchased, that beautiful, very delicate table that I purchased. Designs, if you will, not only for the draperies that you see, but even some of the drapes, all of the busts that had been completed by Jean-Anton Houdon while I was there, busts of General Washington, busts of Benjamin Franklin, some of myself, the Marquis de Lafayette, and Greg, the most popular bust, can you imagine, of all those aforementioned, was of John Paul Jones. I brought more of his bust back with me, the work of Houdon, than any other. And so most of those that I have known made their way back to our country, not all at the same time. 86 crates, I doubt there was a packet boat that could accommodate all of them. But yes, in time, they all returned. I had some of these appointments sent to New York when I first resided there, our government in New York for a few months, the spring of '90. And then as we removed our government to Philadelphia, well, then many of those other crates were unpacked, and all of those French furnishings adorning my Quaker accommodations in that Quaker city. Somewhat sparse accommodations. I rented a house from Mr. Leeper, Thomas Leeper. They are nearby, but a block away from the old State House in Philadelphia. I believe they're referring to the State House now as Independence Hall. But I began to remodel those accommodations and decorating in the French fashion. I can tell you, the interior of my dwelling in Philadelphia while I was Secretary of State was quite the talk of the town.
We have a couple of questions asking how you pay for items that you purchase. George asks that outright, and also Steve asks, how is something you purchased in London paid for in Virginia? So can you talk about that?
Yes, well, of course I do carry ready money, but not much ready money. I think you may already know, in a nation where 9 out of every 10 Americans live on farms, as I know it, then you may be looked upon as land rich, but cash poor. You do not have the immediate ready money. So everything continues to be on credit. Now, while I was in France for 5 years, I had various factors and bankers with whom I would, of course, design what I could afford in credit or otherwise. And so there you're always beholden to the credit. But then remember, as a farmer, and this is aside from what you might call the disbursements from our government to me as our minister plenipotentiary to France, what I was paid by our government there. But all of the other disbursements that would come from my own private accounts through French bankers while I was there were dependent upon, well, the success of the productivity back home upon my 5 farms. And the other farms, the ones particular that I held down in Bedford County that came to me as part of my late wife's dowry. Now, here were 2 things relevant to it. Firstly, a farmer is always at the mercy of the vagaries of the seasons and the crops. So though you want to be rest assured in the available credit, that remains unto the seasons to decide. And then secondly, of course, all of my holdings were rented out when I served our nation in France. So I did not really ultimately benefit from it, save what I was provided in the rental of them. All of the produce and the productivity went to those who were renting it out.
Okay, one other question, an interesting one from Maria. She asks if you give a lot of thought to your purchases or if you are an impulse buyer.
An impulse buyer. Oh. Maria, what a quaint statement, an impulse buyer. In other words, by impulse, immediate impulse, when I see something and am so struck and to wonder whether it might be available for purchase or nay, would I immediately seek its purchase? I should not deny. I should not deny by any means. In fact, I'm often to think that gifts that I am prone to give are inspired by the impulse upon seeing it, resulting from the desire or the interest of someone else to have that. Having heard in conversation or someone informing me that someone might be interested, yes, Maria, if I happen to see that object, well, then immediately will come to mind who would delight in receiving it from me as a gift. I will endeavor to make the purchase.
So what kind of purchasing power do enslaved people possess? And do you ever shop together?
That is a very good question. Yes, I certainly from my youth have gone to shopping with those who are enslaved in my inheritance. And as a young boy, referring earlier to my trips back and forth to Williamsburg City, I was often accompanied by Jupiter Evans. And Jupiter Evans and I even roomed together in the garret, that is the top floor of the building of the old Royal College of William and Mary. And yes, there in Williamsburg, Jupiter Evans and I would both go shopping. Now, as you know, our families here at Monticello, those enslaved, cultivate their own gardens, and they attend to being hired out to others who provide monies for what they may want to sell or for the work that they might engage, not only with others, but also here at Monticello and the 4 adjoining farms. So they have that purchasing power of what monies they have made themselves. And yet, as you well understand, with the present laws binding our entire nation, an enslaved individual cannot go so far as to purchase their own property, unless, of course, they be freed and manumitted. And then, of course, they have that freedom of purchasing power.
Melissa wonders if you're a collector of certain things that you buy wherever you go.
Melissa, I would say that if anything were to be surmounting something else in my delight to collect and to purchase, would it not be books? Well, Melissa, I have often said I cannot live without books. I have a canine appetite for books. You cannot see right now, I try to keep our parlor as free of the encumbrance of many, many books as possible. But if you were walking through the rest of the house with me, well, you would see books everywhere. It has been described that there can hardly be a square foot on some of the floors in the chambers without books piled everywhere. People even question me, what is the purpose of the great dome room? Is that to be a library? Well, it certainly is a great space to accommodate more books. So I would say collecting books has been an interest in me. Paintings, if you will, and portraits have always been an interest of me. In fact, I refer to these many paintings as you see about here. I don't know whether you can see one of our friend, the hero of our nation, let alone the French, General the Marquis de Lafayette. There's a fine likeness of me made by Mr. Stewart. There's Mr. Adams. Oh, Mather Brown painted that portrait of Adams. He painted one of me as well. We exchanged them back and forth. You may see the general up there. And then on the other side, above these beautiful mirrors, which I also purchased in Paris, these are pier mirrors, quite stately, quite beautiful. Just above it, you see, well, the three foremost minds of the modern world, as I refer to them, John Locke, Sir Isaac Newton, and Sir Francis Bacon. So portraits have always been of my great delight. And there's a little mezzotint, if you will, of Mr. Rittenhouse right yonder there. He was a very good friend of mine, and the first to hold the position head of our national mint in Philadelphia, 1792. What a man of great genius he was. So yes, I would say collecting has remained my great interest, but always to collect to share, as we are doing right now.
We still have quite a few questions coming in. Jeff asks if you and Mrs. Jefferson ever went shopping together.
Oh my, Jeff, yes, we certainly did go shopping together. And I did some shopping for her. She would shop for me. In fact, one particular item of which I am so proud to have still in my possession was a forte piano that I purchased for the late Mrs. Jefferson to be accepted by she of whom I am affording that attention to gift her in kind. We would buy little trinkets, if you will, that only one and the other would appreciate in its intimacy and what it might represent betwixt us, and I should not share that with so many. That is always between one and the other in their relationship. But yes, Mrs. Jefferson and I frequently went shopping together. Oh, my. If she had had the opportunity to go to France.
So let's turn a little bit to your retirement. In your retirement, we understand that ready money is rather tight in your daily budget. You've always had a reputation for being generous and gift giving. Can you still afford to be so generous in your retirement?
With one caveat only, retirement is not a word in my vocabulary. I continue to pursue what has always interested me, and those interests continuing to accrue in their further frontiers of knowledge and enlightenment. Not a blade of grass grows uninteresting to me, so I have to afford it. I make myself afford it. But again, not so much for myself, to share with others. When I learned that my granddaughter Ellen would delight in a lovely lady's side saddle, well, yes, I procured that for her. It startled her. When I learned that my granddaughter Virginia would delight in a new silk dress, well, then I procured that for her. My grandchildren have always said that I would wave the fairy wand. By that, they simply could not understand how I knew what they most desired. Well, there are many people who live here at our Monticello. Word does get around. And so that is one of my great delights. And I make myself afford that. It was my granddaughter, Virginia, had a very unhappy circumstance for her one day. She had the most beautiful gown, and she tore it. She ripped it. Oh, it was terrible for her and everyone else to see her great despair. Well, I told her, can you imagine? I told her that I myself would mend it. Whether she believed it or not, within a very short time, she received a package, and there, inside the package, was a brand new silk dress. My granddaughter Mary has a predilection for cats. And I'm not going to deny I'm rather partial to them than dogs. And when you visit our Monticello and go above stairs, you will see that in the bottom panel of many of the doors are cut holes. They're for the cats. They have little velvet curtains on the inside, as, of course, that fits their particular, sense of decorum. And so I found out of a book called, name of a book called Mary and Her Cat. Well, whom do you think received that as a present? And on the birthdays of my grandchildren, for the ladies on their 18th birthday, for the gentlemen on their 21st birthday, well, I procure for them a watch, a timepiece. Remember, just as you need to manufacture what you care to purchase and how you care to spend, well, we have to manufacture our time. Because as I've always said, when time passes us by, can you get it back again? That's why it's so useful to understand that when we are in our younger years.
So along those lines, Beth wonders, what was your favorite gift given and or received?
The favorite gift throughout time that I have received is certainly the gift of the hand in matrimony with my late wife, Mrs. Jefferson. Only 10 years of uncheckered happiness. A very good friend of mine during the years of our American Revolution, with whom I became the more friendly when our government was in Philadelphia, though he had to leave immediately, was General Thaddeus Kosciuszko. And when General Kosciuszko was recalled by his people, though he was not born in Poland, but elsewhere, but recalled by the Poles, welcomed by the Poles to come back and to help them pursue their liberation. He asked me two things. First of all, that I might write his last will and testament, and secondly, that I might liquidate his entire estate and a portion of it to go to build a school for the education of young black children. Well, I pursued the obligation happily, wrote his last will and testament, deposited it right here in the courthouse in Charlottesville. Then I liquidated his entire estate and I sent him all the monies, but there was one of his possessions I could not possibly sell: the most luxuriant sable furs. My, how beautiful. Nothing like it anywhere in North America. It is of the kingdoms of the Russias. And these sable furs were a gift from Tsar Paul I, the son of great Catherine. Yes, these sable were gifted to Kosciuszko and his countryman, Julian Niemcewicz, when they were released from prison in the Russias. Not a furrier in Philadelphia nor New York would purchase these elegant sables. And so I wrote the general. I said, I am unable to sell this, liquidate, and send to you what ought to be a great monies. Do you know, he wrote back to me and said, they are yours. I gift them to you. Well, I will tell you, not many know this. There's been great controversy over the years, but I decided that I would have a great coat tailored with these fine sables. And so, attending to a tailor there in Philadelphia, I had a beautiful wool coat tailored with the fur lining. There you are, lining the inside of the coat, save for the cuffs and the collar. Oh, I'll never forget when Mrs. Bayard Smith, Margaret Bayard Smith, the wife of the newspaperman Samuel Harrison Smith, were visiting me there in the president's house. It was rather cold, and so to comfort her, I placed, if you will, what she referred to as the mantle of monarchy upon her shoulders, that she be warmed. What a wonderful statement. The mantle of monarchy, yes, gifted from a monarch, and yet I, having designed and had tailored a beautiful wool coat. You know, when Mr. Sully, the artist, came to visit me here at our Monticello, He was on commission from our military academy, which I helped to found in 1802, West Point. And he asked if I might sit for a portrait and what I might consider to be worthy to don in that portrait. I knew exactly. For West Point, having been defended formally during the war by General Kosciuszko, I put on that great coat. He told me that perhaps years later, that West Point might desire a full-length portrait. And I told him, if they do, please make a sketch now of me in the Kosciuszko furs, that they may never forget that full length. I hold great pride to that gift from the general, let alone his alliance with the Polish people. And do you know, I said, and if you paint a full-length portrait, have, if you will, a rendering of one of the columns there in the hall of our House of Representatives, so that it might be said that the chief magistrate of a democratically Republican system of government stands donning the mantle of monarchy, though subservient to the concerns of the people. Now, I beg your pardon, I've rambled on about that, but I should show you what I intend to be a gift myself. I enjoy much more gift giving. And as we were introduced earlier with this slope made by Ben Randall, cabinet maker in Philadelphia, upon which I wrote our nation's great charter, I'm intending to gift this to my granddaughter, Ellen. I made mention of her earlier, receiving a very fine lady's side saddle from me. But as she married Mr. Joseph Coolidge the Younger, right here in this very parlor. Well, Mr. Coolidge is from Boston. And so they set out on the honeymoon trip back to Boston. I suggested to them they take my route up through the northern lakes where Mr. Madison and I traveled back in the spring of '91. And so I immediately then set out her wedding trousseau that by water it would arrive in Boston by the time they arrived. Mr. James Hennings built a very lovely slope, a writing desk for my granddaughter Ellen, with the hope, of course, that she would take to it and correspond and write me many a letter. Well, as fate would have it, the ship carrying the trousseau sank. They never received the many gifts that I intended for the two of them there for their wedding bliss in Boston. And so I have decided that I will send them as a replacement this writing desk. And I will read for you, if you would allow, what I have fixed upon a paper on this writing desk. It's a little commentary from myself that I know will bemuse Ellen, but she'll perfectly understand, and I know Mr. Coolidge will too. He's a fine gentleman. To wit, this is what I have written. Thomas Jefferson gives this writing desk to Joseph Coolidge the Younger as a memorial of affection. It was made from a drawing of his own by Ben Randall, cabinet maker in Philadelphia, with whom he first lodged in his arrival in that city in May 1776. So I said 75 earlier, 76, 75. This is one of the reasons why I write so much down, so I can refer to it to hope to get it to more precise in any respect. It is the identical one on which he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Politics, as well as religion, has its superstitions, and these, gaining strength with time, may one day give an imaginary value to this relic for its association with the great birth of the great charter of our independence. I think you will understand as well that it is not so much perhaps the material value as it is the idea and the emotions it has spurred from the document written upon it.
We have time for one more question. And since this is the holiday season of the year, can you share some of the holiday gifts that you have exchanged over the years?
Referred to it earlier, and I think a fitting reply, the exchange of the greatest holiday gift. I think many of you know that it has long been habit and custom. And not only, I want to say, here in Virginia, but throughout our former colonies, throughout the 24 states that I know make up our great union of these states, let alone throughout the world, the greater portions of the world, that marriages, if you will, are made, weddings convene during the 12 days of Christmas, during Christmastide. All of that, I think, in its spirit and in its essence, regardless of the material wants of families at that time, even regardless, if you will, of a material ring, all of it bespeaks the warmth and heart that we know is so prevalent during Christmastide. All of it bespeaks family. I have referred to family several times in our gathering here this afternoon, and I hope we may keep that so deeply in mind, that you might come visit us here at our Monticello and meet all of our families. That is how we have all gotten along and endeavored to do so with great hope for our future, let alone our nation. So I should not look upon one material item more than another as the greatest gift I have ever received at Christmastide, but rather I should look upon family, our families, each and every one of us together, the great family of man, that it might be inspired during these darkest days of the year with the greatest hope of accruing light as we continue through our next 365 days. I remain at this Christmastide your humble and obedient servant, Thomas Jefferson. I look forward to visiting with you again. Godspeed, happy Christmastide, and a very happy and prosperous New Year.